some information on wildlife in Malaysia, and also I think more importantly for you is the potential of zoonotic disease transmission among wild animals in the country. So I'm actually from the veterinary faculty in UPM. Okay.
Boleh tak boleh buka slide sini tadi? Pakai pointer.
Right. So as we all know, Malaysia is actually a major biodiversity country. In fact, we are one of the top 10 in the world, and that is probably due to the fact that we have a vast, very ancient rainforest which supports very rich fauna and flora in the country, very diverse animal life and also plant life. And this is just a simple map showing you the world biodiversity hotspots. And as you can see, the major hotspots are of course in South America, and but in Southeast Asia we have a large diversity of wild animals. And these wild animals, of course, exist in an ecosystem together with humans and plants. So we all exist together, and anything that we do will affect the animals as well. So these are the top 10 countries with threatened species. And as you can see, Malaysia is number 3. Okay? So Malaysia boleh is correct because we are actually doing a lot to destroy our forests. And also, we are doing very well in destroying the animals as well. But more importantly, if you look at the global trend in terms of mammals, you can see that this is a phenomenon in Southeast Asia. So this trend of threatened animals is in Southeast Asia because I think we've got one of the highest rates of forest destruction and habitat alteration due to increase in plantations, increase in housing development and things like that. So all kinds of human activities are eventually encroaching into the natural habitats of wildlife. And what is happening is that you will find that this is a major problem in the country. Habitat loss and habitat degradation is the major problem that is causing extinction, localized extinction, and also wildlife destruction. Then we've also got various things like hunting and trapping, illegal hunting and trapping, which is also detrimental to the wild animals. And of course, roadkills do contribute to the decline as well. But we find a very increasing trend of poaching and commercial trade, and also wildlife meat trade in the whole of Southeast Asia. So these are examples of bear. This is a bear actually, which from Malaysia, which was found slaughtered, and they normally take the paw as a delicacy, send off to China and Taiwan, and then loads of wild animals, seizures, and lots of tigers that are poached actually in the country. So this is the current situation in Malaysia regarding wildlife. And as you can see, this is not only in Malaysia; it's a global phenomenon. Habitat loss is the major cause of wildlife decline throughout the world. So it's by many fold the most serious problem. And so for the purpose of this, so how does habitat loss and wildlife meat trade actually influence zoonotic disease transmission? So we know that this is a phenomenon which is happening in the country, but in our context, how does it influence us? When you have habitat destruction, essentially animals are going to be displaced from natural habitat. Okay, they are going to then start to encroach into urban and suburban areas because the natural habitat is being lost. They will have to find some other places for food and shelter. And then when they come into urban and suburban areas, they realize that this place is full of food. Human activities, all our waste, we have plantations and things like that. And these suburban areas and urban areas can actually support these animal populations, and then they start to multiply. Okay, they start to multiply and reproduce. And often these animals, when they come out of the forest, they will bring with them all their pathogens. And not only the pathogens, sometimes even the vectors will follow them out of the forest. So we are increasingly seeing a shift in the transmission dynamics of a lot of zoonotic diseases, just based on the fact that the natural habitats of the wildlife is being disrupted. And I think this is something very urgent to address, because it's a fact that these animals are now out of the forest and in urban areas, and we have to look and see how this influences infection in humans. Right, and this shift of animals from their natural habitat into urban areas is now narrowing the gap between the human-wildlife interface. And this gap is actually very important. Traditionally, this gap was quite large, and that was the barrier which stopped transmission between zoonotic wildlife diseases and humans. But now because this gap has been really narrowed down, we are seeing, I'll show you later, we are seeing the emergence of a lot of zoonotic diseases in humans now, especially from wildlife. And of course, if you talk about the exotic meat trade, we are directly exposed to pathogens when we consume exotic meat. Especially, a lot of the exotic meat is illegally slaughtered, so there's no veterinary inspection, there's no health checks on the meat. It's being sold in the black market. So people will just consume this meat. Sometimes it's undercooked, and they've got various ways of preparing the meat which doesn't kill the pathogens, especially parasites. So and then we are seeing a lot of increase of incidents of humans getting infected with tissue, protozoa, like Sarcoidosis and things like that. Okay, this I'm sure you're very familiar with this, but just to give you a brief overview of how the pathogen flow occurs when we talk about wildlife, domestic animal, and human interface. You've got the wildlife on the far right corner, which traditionally used to be sorry?
Very far away lah.
Yeah, traditionally used to be very far away. They used to be isolated. And even if they are in contact, they are only in contact with the very domestic wildlife, which goes into the forest and come up to the suburban areas. But increasingly now we are seeing that there's actually direct contact with domestic animals and wildlife, because a lot of farms are now being opened very close to forested areas. They clear the forest for the logs, of course. Then they have to do something, so they start to farm there. And then you will find that a lot of wildlife are starting to interact with the domestic animals. And of course then the humans which have to interact with domestic animals to take care of them are exposure to the risk of zoonosis as well. So this pattern has changed dramatically over the past few years, and we are seeing increasingly now more direct contact between humans and wildlife and domestic animals. Traditionally, the peri-domestic animals used to be an intermediary, okay, but I think not anymore. And then epidemiologists among you will know this, but epidemiologists always talk about the triad, the agent, host, and environment. But for us, we also like to include the vector, so we call this the quartet. Because we are, when you talk about wildlife diseases, vectors play an extremely important role, and habitat disruption also influences the dynamics of the vectors as well. Not only the host, the wildlife host, but also the dynamics of the vectors are being influenced. We are increasingly seeing traditional forest mosquitoes now being found in urban areas, in suburban areas. So the mosquitoes are also being displaced. The other arthropod vectors are also being displaced out of the forest, and now they have their own place in the epidemiological quartet again. Right, you're familiar with this as well, but just to go through very briefly, these are the major routes of how humans can get infected, basically from animals or from wildlife in general. Aerosols, of course, not so common unless it's a very close contact. And then oral is something which is starting to happen because as the animals come into the urban areas, we get a contamination of food and water from their fecal material. And then direct contact as well, especially if we're talking about the exotic meat trade, termites. But I think more importantly for wildlife diseases are the vectors. So vectors actually play a very important role in the transmission of pathogens from wildlife to humans and also from wildlife to domestic animals. In fact, most of the major human pandemics can be traced back to a salviatic cycle, to a wildlife cycle, and can also be traced back to a mosquito vector or arthropod vector. If you talk about JE, you talk about Nipah, you talk about bird flu, Sarcoidosis, the various human infections, have all got a wildlife component inside. So I think it's becoming increasingly important to, as we talk about One Health, to address issues in wildlife medicine as well. So this was a survey done some time ago, and they found that over 60% of the human EIDs are actually zoonosis. So a very large portion of EIDs are zoonosis, and out of this, almost 72% originated in wildlife. So wildlife play an extremely major role in EIDs in humans globally. And what we see is that the major EID is of bacterial origin. Viruses and prions also play an important role. Then you've got protozoa and helminths. So this was published in Nature in 2008, and actually the trend is still very similar now, after almost 8 years, 7 or 8 years. Right. Please stop me and ask if you want to ask anything, any questions if not clear about the slide. So we see this, let's go through very quickly. we have found that since the 40s until 2012, there are many spots of emerging zoonotic wildlife diseases globally. So it's a very widespread phenomenon. Interestingly and also surprisingly, there are hotspots in North America and in Europe as well. So it's not so much an Asian problem anymore, but now we find that in the Americas and in Europe, it's also a big issue here and east. And yeah, just to look very quickly, we find that it's basically widespread throughout the world, these emerging diseases, which can be vectored by various species of animals. And in Southeast Asia, it's also a big issue. Right. This is work in progress. So I'm trying to compile basically the various taxon of animals and what kind of pathogens they can transmit in Malaysia, specifically in Malaysia, based on published reports and based on surveys and things like that. And we find that the viruses and the bacteria are very widely spread. Many taxon of wild animals can transmit various pathogens, of which the bacteria and the viruses are probably the most important. But there are some wildlife which are very specific. For example, if you look at the reptiles, you see the turtles, major hotspot of transmission of salmonellosis from turtles as well. And in snakes, you will find that Sarcocystis is a big issue with the transmission of Sarcocystis by snakes. And rodents, as you well know, bacteria, viruses, and primates. Primates and bats and rodents are probably the three taxon of wildlife which are very important actually in the country in terms of transmitting zoonotic pathogens.
But what is the color indicate?
Oh, sorry.
Some dark.
Basically, the importance of the darkness. Yeah. So as you get from light to dark red, it's more important. This is still a work in progress. I'm still compiling the literature. So. Right. A whole variety of viruses. I listed only a few important ones, which can be transmitted by wildlife in Malaysia. You've got, of course, Nipah and the Nipah virus group of pathogens, which we all know are transmitted by the fruit bats, the flying foxes, direct contact by urine. Then you've got the human virus, which also by bats. Then JE, something very big in our country, used to be affected by the Culex mosquito. And then chikungunya is something very important now in the country. You see a lot of infections. Of course, Aedes transmits this. And primates have been shown to harbor the virus. There's a salvific cycle. And then you've got, of course, Pulau, Melaka, Campa viruses, all by bats. AI is a big thing, avian influenza. The birds are the reservoirs. And of course, we've got it by direct contact. Methicillin herpes virus is something which is fairly new in the country, but I'll show you later some data where they found quite high prevalences in the monkeys. And rabies is something which Malaysia is supposed to be rabies-free, but recently we've had some outbreaks in Perlis. We're not free anymore. I think the vaccine belt, the vaccine belt is has broken in the Thai main border. So it may be something which will be emerging soon in the future, something probably for us to think about as well. And the thing about rabies is that it can be transmitted by the bats as well, insectivorous bats. And these bats fly, so anything that flies can potentially transmit the infection quite quickly. Right, just very quickly, I think the Nipah virus, we all know, there was the first outbreak in 1998 in Ipoh, Malaysia, in the pig farms, especially in Tambun area. And then in the same year itself, we found infection in Negeri Sembilan. What I'm trying to impress upon you now is that within a year of infection, from north it spread very quickly to the south due to movement of animals, movement of livestock, and things like that. So the infection really spread very quickly. And of course, the major outbreak, the 98-99 outbreak, involved over 280 cases, of which there was a significant number of deaths. In fact, the CFR was almost 40%. So it is quite it is quite an important thing for us to recognize. And this is a zoonosis. Nipah virus is a zoonosis. So I think when we talk about One Health in Malaysia, we cannot exclude anymore the involvement of wild animals in the transmission of infections. Right, and we know that the fruit bats, the large fruit bats are the culprits, where they are the reservoirs of the infection. And apparently they don't show any clinical signs of infection. They are very efficient reservoirs, and up to 30% of them are seropositive, have seroconverted, right? Good, and of course the mode of transmission is very simple. direct contact with urine and secretions, so infection can be transmitted very quickly. Okay, chikungunya is something which is also important and emerging in the country. First reported in the 70s actually, and then these are just the records of the outbreaks. We can see that there was over 10,000 cases reported from 2008 to 2010 alone in Malaysia. Okay, and now we know that the macaques are actually harboring the virus, and there is a potential symbiotic cycle already for the infection of chikungunya. Right. And yeah, but of course, it depends on where you look. There are hotspots of infection in the monkeys. Some places are negative, but you can get infection rates up to almost 4%. So it's quite significant in the monkeys. Primate herpes virus is something which we need to talk about if we are worried about the monkeys. And at the moment, the biggest problem, or not really a problem, I mean the biggest issue is the displacement of monkeys from the forest into urban areas. And traditionally, it used to be something which we can control, but at the present moment, I'm sure you're aware, almost everywhere you go in Malaysia, you will find monkeys, the long-tailed macaques. And unfortunately, they bring with them a lot of pathogens. So we are trying to look for solutions to either contain the population or to see how we can actually widen the gap between the human macaque so to prevent transmission. So herpes virus is something we should think about when we talk about macaques. Transmission is very simple by bites, scratches, even aerosols. Okay. And of course, the monkeys, once they're infected for life. It's difficult to get rid of infection in monkeys, and they don't show much clinical signs. You get some simple, ocular and also respiratory involvement. But in humans, of course, we know that it can be very fatal. And we found that a recent study showed that almost 40% of the macaques in the country are shedding the virus. So this is very significant. And of course, we know that macaques are now in the playgrounds, they are in recreational areas, and children and a lot of public are being exposed to these monkeys. And if it can be just transmitted by bites or by scratches or urine, it's something very serious for us to consider. Right, yeah, so as I mentioned, in monkeys, it's very simple infection, but of course in humans it can be fatal, very fatal. Within months of exposure, you start developing all kinds of clinical signs, including paralysis and encephalitis as well. Right, so the major bacterial zoonoses in the country, I've just listed out a few based on published records. Salmonellosis is probably, and salmonellosis and leptospirosis are on top of the list. And we know that salmonellosis is effectively transmitted by reptiles. Reptiles, especially turtles, harbor this bacteria without any clinical signs, and they shed this bacteria in their feces. And now we are increasingly seeing a lot of people keeping exotic pets, a lot of people keeping turtles, lizards, snakes as pets, and they are then exposed to salmonellosis from their pet reptile. Leptospirosis, we know, is a big problem in the country, which is from the rodents, and it's waterborne, and they shed it in their urine. So infection can be quite fast. Tuberculosis is something which is a big question mark, because we have found primates and elephants positive for Mycobacterium tuberculosis, but we are not sure whether it's a potential zoonosis or not yet. The country is not been proven. But in Indonesia, certainly we know that the primates get the infection from humans. So it's actually anthropozoonosis. So the human handlers are actually infecting the monkeys with tuberculosis. And in Borneo as well, the orangutans, about 60% of the orangutans in the rehab centers have got tuberculosis. And when they did DNA analysis, they found that it's of human origin. And then these orangutans are prisoners for life. They cannot be released back into the wild. You know, they can potentially spread the infection to the wild orangutan. Camphilo is also something which we need to think about, reptiles, amphibians, and potentially primates. I'm not sure about that. Okay, yeah, I've already talked about this. Salmonellosis is something in the reptiles, and you know, humans can of course be symptomatic carriers, and they can be reservoirs as well. And studies have shown that a very high percentage, 97% of the reptiles actually harbor salmonella. So it's quite a serious issue, and especially an issue with children, because children will play with their pet turtles and they won't wash their hands, and they eat the food, and some of them even kiss the reptiles, things like that. So we find quite a lot of salmonella cases from reptiles. Okay. Leptospira, you already know, I'm not going to go through this, just a very simple thing. I think more importantly, what I want to impress upon you is that it's a long-standing infection in the country since the 1920s. It's been found already in the rats, in the wild rats, forest rats. Okay, and we know that not only rats, but now even bats and marsupials can shed the bacterium as well. And of course, the infection in Malaysia is always linked to some forest activity, linked to some water recreation, forest activity, exposure to the bacteria. And the CFR in the country is now at the average of about slightly over 4%. Right, let's go on now to the parasitic zoonosis. There's actually much more parasitic zoonosis, and I'm traditionally a parasitologist, so you can see the list is much longer than the virus and the bacteria. This is my comfort zone. But I think essentially top on the list would be malaria and sarcoidosis. Yeah? We know that Plasmodium knowlesi now is the most common form of human malaria in the country. It's no more falciparum and vivax, it's now Plasmodium knowlesi, the most prevalent form of human malaria. And Plasmodium knowlesi was traditionally a primate-specific malaria pathogen, but now because of the displacement of primates and also the close contact between the humans and primates, we find that knowlesi malaria is very common. Interestingly, I'll show you some data later. The traditional forest vectors, which are the Anopheles mosquitoes, which were normally only found in the forest, now are being found in the plantations and in the suburban areas as well. So there's clear evidence that they are following the primate host out of the forest. Yeah. And eventually, but we don't know whether they're breeding yet, but I think eventually they will adapt to breed even in urban areas. Okay, we've got a whole list: Sarcocystis, Blattocystis, Cryptosporidosis, and things like that. I won't go down the list, you're probably quite familiar with all this. Yeah? I just want to impress upon you that wildlife hosts play a very important role, because in wild animals, most of the time, the infection is very silent. They don't succumb to the disease. They harbor the parasite, they harbor the pathogen without any clinical signs, and therefore they are very efficient reservoirs of the infection. Okay. Sarcocystis, just very quickly to go through, I'm sure you know this already, it's a Bacterium protozoa, very widespread throughout the whole world with quite a number of species, and it can infect all kinds of animals, mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, you name it. They can all get infected by Sarcocystis. Okay, and of course in the definitive host it is normally asymptomatic, but except in humans, humans show clinical signs. Of course, there's, as you know, there are two forms of Sarcocystis, muscular and the gastrointestinal one. In humans, the muscular form is the most important. The gastrointestinal form just gives you mild irritation, you get some diarrhea, eventually there's a self-cure mechanism. Right, humans can also act as the intermediate host, where you get cysts in the muscles as well. So, a whole variety of mammals in Malaysia can act as a host for Sarcocystis, and we have found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 species of Sarcocystis in the country, out of which Nesbitae, which is a reptile-specific Sarcocystis, is the one which is being implicated in human infections in Malaysia. So reptiles play a very important role in the transmission cycle of Sarcocystis in the country. So as I mentioned, humans can be definitely hosts for traditionally hominids and sweet hominids, but in Malaysia now we suspect there's Nesbitae involvement as well. And as you know, it's transmitted by either ingesting raw or uncooked meat, which contains the Sarcocystis. And the parasites will then go into asexual cycles in the intestine, cause some gastroenteritis, but essentially, it's something which can be easily cured. More importantly is that we can also act as intermediate hosts with Nesbitae, where we get muscular cysts forming, and then you get all kinds of problems when the muscles are involved. And this is the most cases of Sarcocystis in Malaysia is of the muscular form. So far, over 150 cases have been recorded. Clinical signs of fever, myalgia, tracheal headache, and things like that. Just a quick historical background. It's not a new infection in the country. Been detected since the 70s. Okay, just a quick overview. The more important one which I want to talk about, I think, is the outbreak. There was a recent outbreak of psychosis in Tioman and Pangkor Island, which involved tourists, especially. The Pangkor outbreak was quite significant because it was the biggest outbreak reported so far in the country, and it involved 92 college students and teachers, out of which almost all of them fell ill within 3 to 4 weeks of getting infected. Okay, and we found that after doing some PCR work, that is actually nesmeti, which is the snake-specific psychosis in muscle biopsies. So how did humans become infected? Possibly by contact with the water, contaminated water, or contact with the reservoir host as well. We don't really know. Can't be tracked. But essentially, they show symptoms of a fever, muscle aches, headaches, GIT involvement as well, and some swelling of the muscles and rash. Tioman Island outbreak was interesting because it involved tourists, and over 100 tourists were infected from 2011 to 2014. It was quite a big scare with MOH as well, so they did a lot of work there. These tourists from all parts of the world, especially in Europe, and they developed a muscular form of psychosis, which was detected by doing some biopsies of the muscle tissue, and we still don't know what is the source of infection. The biggest culprit is the monitor lizard, or the biawak, which is known to harbor the nesmeti as well. And the interesting thing is that no locals were infected on the Tioman Island, only tourists. So is there some form of acquired immunity among the locals? We don't know. It would be interesting to check actually serologically whether we're all seroconverted or not. We have antibodies against this parasite. But to be honest, there's no reason why locals can get infected unless we've got very strong antibodies against the pathogen. Or could it be unreported cases, because a lot of people get fever, muscle aches, and headaches, and they think it's just normal, flu or fever or things like that. And of course, in Europe, they're very concerned about this kind of things. They go and see a doctor immediately, and then if they suspect psychosis, they will take muscle biopsies, do PCR, and things like that. So I think maybe the detection process is probably better there as well. Could be, don't know. Right, the reservoir host not yet been determined, as I mentioned. So zoonotic malaria is something which is emerging in the country. It's all just history. Just to let you know that it's been around for a very long time. But the important thing is that it was kind of a re-emerging thing, because in 2004, some work in Sarawak revealed that almost 60% of the malaria cases in humans were actually zoonotic malaria caused by Plasmodium knowlesi. Okay. So whether it's been there all the while and it was not detected, we don't know, or whether it's a newly emerging infection. The thing about knowlesi is that microscopically you can't differentiate it from P. malariae. The trophozoites all look the same. But by doing PCR, of course, then we can differentiate the two species. And I think because of this PCR work, that was the reason why we started to detect knowlesi in the country. Otherwise, I'm sure it would have just gone as some other form of human Plasmodium actually. So knowlesi and cynomolgi are confirmed zoonosis in Malaysia. There was a recent case of cynomolgi infection in Kelantan as well. And P. inuai has been proven to be zoonotic by experimental transmission, but there's no natural infection reported yet in the country yet. But these three Plasmodium species are highly prevalent in our macaques, which I'll show you later. Very high percentage of macaques harbor all this. In fact, inuai and cynomolgi can go up to about 60-70% of the monkeys have got this infection. Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's the most common form now of primary malaria in Southeast Asia, knowlesi, and also the most common form of human malaria in Malaysia at the moment. It's been reported in a wide range of countries now. Started off from the report in Borneo, then everybody else in Southeast Asia started doing PCR, and we found that they have got infection in the macaques. Very high, especially in Indochina. And of course, the main vectors we know are the anopheles mosquitoes, Hecori, Belvacensis, the latest group, which are predominantly forest mosquitoes, okay? But now I'll show you that they're already out of the forest. And urban infections at the moment in humans are still very low, and all infections can still be traced back to some activity in the forest. So these people actually went to the forest for recreation. They were maybe part-time hunters or things like that. Okay. Right, and why are we seeing an increasing infection? Again, when we talk about the bridge between the human-wildlife interface, we suspect that this is the problem. The monkeys are now being displaced out of the forest, okay? And it's also been misdiagnosed traditionally as Plasmodium malariae because the stages can resemble falciparum, but the mature parasite resemble malaria. So, of course, you need to do PCR and molecular work to actually diagnose mollusci. Okay? Right, these are just some clinical features which you see in humans, typical malaria kind of features. But I think the most prominent infection with mollusci, which is different from the other species of Plasmodium, is that the parastemia can reach high peaks very quickly. So it is the parasite which can cause the highest parastemia in humans, and if not treated, can be very fatal. In fact, there's a recent report which, after doing a lot of clinical investigations, they realized that Plasmodium mollusci is the most fatal, not only the most common, but the most fatal form of human malaria now in Malaysia. Right, okay. So just to share with you some work which is hot from the oven, not published yet, hopefully soon to be published. So we studied over 700 macaques. Macaca fascicularis is the long-tailed macaque, the cur. It is the most common primate in Malaysia. So this macaca is a cur. And we screened these monkeys from over 70 locations in the country. We sampled urban, suburban, agricultural, and also forested areas. And we did some PCR work. We amplified the SSU RNA, and we found that 13.4% of the macaques are positive for Plasmodium mollusci, okay, which is actually quite high. And these are our sampling sites. We started with the west coast. Now we're moving on to the east coast of the country as well. So these are our sampling sites in the west coast of the country. So it's very well represented. And you can see that the prevalence, you can find some hotspots of infection. Up north, northern Perak, Penang area is a hotspot of mollusci infection. There's another hotspot in Negeri Sembilan as well. So again, the colors represent the intensity of the prevalence of the infection.
Wow.
So you can find that why is this data important? I think it's important for control and for prevention measures. If you want to talk about maybe culling the macaques or population control of the macaques, I think we need to focus in these areas where the macaques are highly infected. So this is some data which will actually facilitate public health workers to help to control and prevent infection in human beings.
So Melimau Melaka got lah.
Semua ada.
That's from Nashim's hometown.
Low prevalence.
Less than 25, but still there lah.
You can money.
You can ada.
Ke lot of mantai you can money.
Bangi area we got infection with Bangi area.
Tak, I didn't know Melimau got monyet. I thought they all died already.
Everywhere, they're all over the place. They're all over the place. But sometimes when I show this data, people get fearful of the monkeys, They feel that, all the monkeys are causing a problem. Actually, it's not the monkeys, it is us. We have actually caused them to come out of the forest. We have destroyed their habitat. Now they're out of the forest. Now, and malaria is not a problem with them. They have the infection happily, they've got no clinical signs, It's us which is the problem now. So I think we have to find measures to control the spread to humans, either by population control of the macaques or by education of humans, because we find that many areas where humans will feed the monkeys, They will, even they go to Kuala Selangor, they just buy parade, they buy all kinds of tidbits and feed the monkeys.
Berandang is 50 to 75.
Ke mana Berandang?
Sorry. Sorry, not Berandang. Is that one Maju Tamping kot. Between sepanjang Melaka dengan Negeri Sembilan.
Ni.
That red colour. That's what? Mantin.
Actual punya ni.
Tampil
Actually, I don't want to disclose the actual location juga. But we have all the GPS coordinates lah. Anyway.
The Kedah that one is yang sepadan tiga negeri tu. Ha? Boleh.
So anyway, this data is not published yet. So it's still, I'm not sure how MOH is going to take it and show them this, but
I got it on video, so I can check.
sorry.
I got it on video, so I can check.
Oh, okay. But don't spread the information. So I just want to show you this. The prevalence of Nolasai, as I mentioned, is supposed to be traditionally from the forest, but now we are seeing the agricultural areas have got the highest infection with Nolasai, and it's already come to the suburban areas, 16%, and even in the urban areas. When we talk about urban areas, it's really housing areas, Chala, PJ, really high infected human areas. Almost 10% of the monkeys are infected. So all it takes is a single bite by the Anopheles mosquitoes to transmit the infection. And
But
luckily, the Anopheles mosquitoes are not in the urban area yet. They found them in the agriculture and plantations, but they have not come to the urban areas yet. But I guess it's just a matter of time. When they adapt, they find suitable breeding areas, they will multiply. So these dynamics will be very interesting to check in 5 years down the line to see how it will change. Yeah, of course, it's just some other epidemiological data to show you how the age and the gender change. I also want to show you some genotyping data which we've done. Essentially, I think the important thing here is that the one in red are the human infections, the genotypes that we found in humans, and the one in purple or blue is the genotype found in the monkeys. And as you can see, there's one dominant genotype in the country, which is both common in humans and macaques. And also, you will notice that all the genotypes found in the humans are also common in the monkeys. So this is a clear picture to show you that it's a real zoonosis. And if the parasite had switched hosts, if there's a human-to-human transmission, we would find unique human genotypes, unique genotypes in the humans. But because all the genotypes in humans can be traced back to the monkeys, we know that it's still an infective zoonosis in humans. Which is good because it's not switch host yet. Because once it switch host, it will be a bigger problem. So at the moment, I think we need to focus on containing the monkey population, and we can probably bring down the human infection. Yeah, again, just some genotyping data, quite complicated, but just to show you that, in the northern part of the country, where the major hotspot is, we find one single genotype only there. So there was probably an outburst of infection at some point, and one predominant genotype is occurring there. And that could potentially be a genotype which is the most pathogenic, because the hotspots are there as well. So if we're looking for control measures, we need to probably source out this genotype and then tackle that first. Okay, yeah, this is some other thing. I think this is my final slide. So we talk about, for vets, we always talk about conservation medicine. It's a fairly new area, but for vets, One Health is the same thing, but we call it conservation medicine because it's a discipline which involves, of course, human vet medicine, public health, conservation biology, ecology, epidemiology. The whole thing is now trying to come together. Okay? And essentially, it's a study of the interrelationship between the dynamics of human and animal infections and how these infections can be effectively transmitted to types of animals. At the end of the day, humans are animals as well. Okay? We are primates. So it's not surprising that we share a lot of the primate infections. And also we use this to say that we study the effects of environment and habitat change on the disease occurrence and also transmission. Because we find that climate change, habitat destruction, all influences the spread of the vectors, number one, and also the spatio-temporal spread of the wildlife host as well. Okay. Great, and so all this data can eventually be used to facilitate proper control measures. And also, if we talk about preventive medicine, this is probably something to think about. And it also allows us to do predictive modeling for infections, whereby we can look at climatic variables, look at occurrence of infections, and then try to come up with models to predict the infection in the future. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is really just the One Health concept, bringing all the disciplines together. So I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me today, and I hope that you will consider incorporating some aspects of zoonosis into your program, because I think it's becoming something which is very important to talk about wildlife Malaysia, because as I mentioned, we are a hotspot for wildlife, and if we don't talk about wildlife zoonosis, nobody else is going to do it. And it's probably a selling point for your program as well. If you talk about foreigners wanting to take your program, we've got specialists in wildlife diseases in the faculty, which we can probably tap into your program as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity.